everyone, so today I'm going to do a quick video titled Beware of the Vegan Human Meat Burger and Is Cockroach Milk the Solution to the Global Hunger Food Crisis? I'm going to do this video today because, as we know, there's a food crisis that is already affecting the world today and of course will affect wealthier nations in years to come. And so as we are projected to be impacted by this, we definitely need to understand the solutions that are being proposed so we can be better prepared. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a vegan human meat burger. So a Swedish company has won multiple awards for creating a vegan burger that essentially mimics human meat in its taste and in its texture. So it's made of ingredients that we are familiar with, such as soy, wheat, mushrooms, and also ingredients that we're not so familiar with, such as their secret spice mix. The company assures us that no humans were harmed in the making of this burger. However, does this mean that biological human materials were not used? And so we don't know that, but it is questionable given the media's fascination with the consumption of human flesh, such as the New York Times article that I recently posted. It's also questionable given the production of the 1973 movie titled Soylent Green, where it ironically takes place in the year 2022 when overpopulation, pollution, and climate change led to a food, water, and housing shortages. So the elites were able to afford opulent living conditions such as clean and natural food and water, while the poor were not able to afford such luxuries. The poor essentially had to have miserable living conditions and also highly processed food. So they were essentially fed wafers called Soylent Red, Soylent Yellow, and Soylent Green. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Do these conditions mirror what we are seeing today? One of the board members of Soylent Green was murdered, leading to an investigation into his murder. However, what initially began as a murder investigation exposed something much deeper and much darker. Soylent Green, the company that initially used plankton to produce their wafers, was now using human bodies, the bodies of the dead and those who were imprisoned, to produce their wafers due to a plankton die-off. As a board member who was murdered was set to essentially expose what was going on, he was killed by his fellow board members due to that fear that he was going to expose them. So the next thing we're going to talk about is cockroach milk. Scientists are proclaiming that cockroach milk may be the next superfood. A species of roach called Diploptera punctata, also known as the Pacific beetle cockroach, is one of the only insects known to give birth to live young. Because of this attribute, the mother is able to feed her babies a pale yellow liquid that essentially comes from her brood sac, which is a human equivalent of a uterus. This yellow liquid turns into crystals in the baby roach's gut, which is said to be one of the most nutritious substances on earth, as article claims. It is also said to outcompete buffalo's milk, which was initially the substance known to be the most nutritious on earth. So it is said that the cockroach milk crystals have 3 times the amount of calories that buffalo milk contains. The second claim made by the article is that it is a complete food. So it has all the protein, essential amino acids, and sugars that a person would need. And the third claim made by the article is that it can be given to those in need of more calories. So therefore, as it is described as a time-release food, as the protein in the milk is digested, the crystals release the equivalent amount of protein that was already digested. So therefore, this product would be marketed to countries that are facing food scarcity. So from the looks of it, it will be marketed to middle-income countries that are already facing food scarcity, and then eventually it will be marketed to wealthier nations who will eventually face food shortages. So another question is, how would this be possibly mass-produced? So there are 2 methods that the article discusses. First is the method of extraction, where the crystals are directly extracted from the roach's gut. The second method is genetic engineering. So basically, the scientists would sequence the genome of the proteins. Then they would develop the synthetic gene sequence in the lab, essentially use this gene sequence to modify the genome of yeast cells, and then have the yeast cells produce the proteins of interest, which would then be eventually commercialized. So the last thing I will touch on briefly, since I discussed this before, is the use of insect meat, lab-grown meat, and cricket meat for human consumption. So I won't talk about this much, but these are additional solutions that are being proposed to combat food scarcity and climate change. So right now, more traditional food sources such as chickens, beef, pork, etc. are being phased out for the solutions I just mentioned. Because those solutions are eventually going to come into more prominence. So with the crises and the proposed solutions underway, what does God's Word have to say about this and the types of food that we should and should not eat? So God's original plan for man is found in Genesis 1 verse 29, where it says, "Then God said, I give you every herb-bearing seed on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, they will be yours for food." Here we can see that God's original plan was to use a plant-based diet, or basically for us to eat a plant-based diet. After man sinned, it is interesting to note that the diet was still plant-based. However, God added one more thing, which were the plants of the field. And we can find this in Genesis chapter 3, verse 18, which says, "It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field." So meat was actually not introduced into man's diet until after the flood, which we can find in Genesis 9, verse 13. However, when God allowed man to eat meat, there were still restrictions. And one of those restrictions was not eating meat with blood in it, as found in Genesis 9, verse 4. And there are biological reasons for that, because blood products can carry disease. The second restriction was making sure to remove fat from the blood before consumption. Fat from the meat before consumption. And you can find that in Leviticus 9, verse 10, Leviticus 7, verse 23, and also Leviticus 3, verse 4. So there's a lot of debate about what this actually means, like this is referred to all fat or just fat around certain organs, and I definitely think that it does refer to the fat around certain organs, such as the kidneys and the liver, because these, of course, are detoxing organs in your body, and these fats contain a lot of toxins. So therefore, these are fats that you should definitely avoid. For other types of fats, I definitely recommend, doing your own due diligence, your research, and asking God for wisdom. We do know that consuming too much fat can definitely lead to certain diseases, so you want to always have balance and moderation in whatever you do. So definitely, consult God for wisdom and read up on your own on that. But Leviticus 11 outlines what is considered meats fit for human consumption versus meat that is not. So interestingly enough, crickets are meat that are fit for human consumption, but humans and cockroaches are not on the list. Some that are on the list of unfit for human consumption are pigs, shellfish, cockroaches, etc., because they are scavengers and eat toxic material and waste matter. So therefore, if you do consume these creatures, you're eating what they ate secondhand. And this may result in something called biomagnification, or the accumulation of parasites that they carry or toxic materials that they ate in your body, which may lead to illnesses such as trichinosis or paralytic shellfish poisoning. So ultimately, I think that there are certain lessons that we can glean from, what we just discussed, and they are the following. The first is know what you're eating, because I believe that we are coming to a time where we either need to grow our own food or have our food locally sourced so we know what we are eating. The second thing is that just because a product is labeled vegan, that doesn't mean that it is vegan, right? So be mindful of the natural flavors in your ingredients list, because this can mean anything. The third is beware of fake meat. It is highly processed and you do not know what it is made of. Number 4 is be mindful of the news that you're consuming and intentional about your reaction, because many times the news introduces an idea that initially seems absurd, But in the times of crisis, people end up accepting the very same solution that they normally wouldn't have accepted otherwise. And some people call this predictive programming. But the reality is that if you're not proactive about what's coming into your mind, you'll end up reacting to anything that is fed to you on TV. And the last thing I'll say is don't be a victim. So you can't control everything that happens in your life, but you can control your response or your reaction to it, right? So understand the events that are happening, but don't allow fear to dictate your response, and ask God for wisdom and respond to situations using His wisdom and timing. So don't allow the news, friends, family, or anyone you look up to or respect or hold in high regard dictate what your response should be. Make sure that you always consult God for wisdom and guidance. And that will be all for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.